Hi, everybody. I'm back again. Um, I think I am. Anyway, like I said, I told you this is gonna be a late one tonight because I had a meeting. So I'm just going to hop right into it. This time around with with this story, I want to kind of do some reactions with it. Last night I didn't because it was just really went really long. Um, just sort of overall views. I think the story is got interesting bits. I'm a little bit concerned about the ages of them because they're just like young kids, basically. They're 14 years old. This was written in 1989. So think about this: is that back in 1989, latchkey kids were very much a thing. So it was a very much a different era. People had different views about what was okay for kids. We were kind of left alone to fend for ourselves, kind of thing. Neither here nor there. That's just the way it was. Um, so some of these things may not stand up very well. I'm just going to say that now. There, I've said it. Um, it's from 1989, so there's a lot of sensibilities and things that you wouldn't find nowadays. So I'm probably going to be tweaking things here and there because, yeah, just to modernize it, make it a little more, even though it's fantasy. Let's just, you know. Anyway, without further ado, though, I am going to hop into this chapter 2 tonight. For those of you who are just joining us, that I'm Beth, and I am currently reading my father's manuscripts a little bit at a time. This go around, I am doing live edits, so you're gonna hear me. Well, that's the thing. You will not hear me for a little while. I'll be sitting there with my head down, but I'm gonna be like scribbling stuff. I'm kind of trying to keep that to a minimum because I know it was kind of a little bit annoying for me yesterday just to sit there and just be silent for like a good 30 seconds. It doesn't sound like a lot when you say that, but when it's actually happening, it's brutal. So I'm gonna try and minimize it as best I can, but I am working on edits because I want to have this ready to go shortly. Um, yeah. So here we go. Chapter 2 of the Sagam. Oh dear. Chapter 2 of the Saga of Haram. Ithansor, the seat of the kings of Aradar, is situated in the north of Wanahar, the King's Land. From it, roads lead in many directions. The company, 5 people and a pack horse, took the road to the northwest, into the duchy of Saracer. A day's travel found them on the road, which seemed to cut straight through the middle of the dark green hills. As they set up camp, Harem looked around nervously. "Are there goblins in these hills?" he asked around. She laughed. "Within a day's travel of the king city itself? Not very likely. By Tran and Vuron, you're not much travel, are you?" Nettled, Harem spat back. "No, but that can be cured." Asteran looked at him, raising her eyebrows. "Ah, you have a temper, do you?" Orist broke in then. "Let be, Asteran. Better for them to be a little scared and over-wary than be careless and wake up one morning dead." She glanced at Orist, then nodded, smiling slightly. "As you say, best they be in the habit of being wary before we reach the truly wild country." Sagahan, as was his nature, said nothing. They carried on, day after day, following the road northwestward. Each day at about noon they would stop for a short while, have some lunch, then rest for a while longer. Then Orist would say, Up, boys, time for sword practice. Then he would then demonstrate a particular sword stroke or counter, which Haram and Merritt would practice while he stood back and gave comments and advice. Tran and Viron, don't close your eyes when you strike. No, your balance is all wrong. Your left foot is directly behind your right. A little breeze could blow you over. No, don't catch his blow dead on your own stick. You might find yourself with one foot of stick and him with three. Then where are you? With swords, the matter is even as bad. You might find yourself with a broken stump of sword. Well, if you don't move faster than that, you can expect more than barked knuckles. You have to throw off his blow with your own right, preferably keeping your own balance and putting him off his. Now again, and try to move like you meant it this time. In the evening again, after camp had been pitched and everyone had eaten, the two were set to practicing again. The boys became discouraged. We can't handle sticks, Haram said to Merritt. How are we ever going to manage real swords? We're doing better, even better than he wants us to. He just isn't in any hurry to give us decent shares in what we take. But there came a time one evening when Oritz said to them, Have done, lads. It grows too dark for this. Put up the sticks. He got up and walked over to them, frowning. So it comes. It comes. Perhaps some day you might make passable swordsmen. He turned and walked away. Evenings were also the time when the senior members of the group would tell stories of other venturers who had become rich and retired, stories of others who had died or turned bad or simply disappeared. Even Sagahan, on occasion, would occasionally mention some incident of note. Most of his stories were of ancient times. It's said that when the grand invasion was halted, there was a goblin wizard in the hills to the north. He gathered about him goblins and other unsavory beasts and maintained his hold for several years. What became of him? Haram persisted. Wait, asked Haram. Well, some say that Garan Blackhair slew him in combat, and his followers dispersed. Others say it was Gorval Greenmage, and with his wand of crystal. But who was it then? Haha, a very good question. I have a suspicion, just a suspicion, mind you, that there was a quarrel among his own band, and it grew to a rebellion, and he was killed in the course of it. Goblins are well known to be a fractious lot, and hard to control. Haram settled back, a little annoyed at the ability of Sagahan to spoil a good story by his maybe this, maybe that statements. They always slept outdoors, even though there were towns along the way. At first, Haram felt too diffident to say anything, but one cold and wet evening he said to Orist, Why do we not find an inn? The warrior gave him a look. Inns, is it? By Tran and Viron, boy, you have exaggerated the notion of our status. I told you before you joined that there are some venturers who became rich and some who make a bare living, and some who starve or turn bandit. We're not among the first group, nor among the third. But if we spend money staying at inns, why, we would soon find ourselves in the third group. And banditry, lad, is not a life I would choose. For one thing, the life is not likely to be a long one. So we hoard our coin, we sleep outside, we get along and we make do. A time will come when we will strike a treasure, when we will come away from a goblin hold with a massive loot, and then it'll be that we will begin staying at inns. Cat, Artemis, can I help you? Are you just gonna? Okay, you do that. So if you hear any more meowing, it's one of the cats. She's really the only one who comes in here and meows. The other one hides and does not want to be on camera for whatever reason. And then there's another one who never comes in the room. So there you go. Yeah. Haram never brought up the subject again. At the town of Rothahan, in the land of Sarastur, they had a brief discussion as to the route. Southwest to Ninantha or straight on? Asked Orist. Haram, knowing his opinion was not sought, remained quiet. Straight on through, I think, said Asteran. You recalled what happened when we last passed through Ninatha? It was not my fault. That fool began making remarks. Remarks about Shondakranians, which you could have ignored if you had not had half a keg of ale inside you. But the fact still remains, that it's too dark, that it's too soon to risk going through Nanantha again. You think so? Orid's eyes were flashing as he towered over Asteran. She is correct, you know. It was a surprise for everyone, Sagahan spoke up. The two looked at him. It is still too soon. They will remember us in Nanantha, and that could mean trouble, which we do not need. Let us go northward. Northward it is, then, said Orit, still scowling. A little north of the town of Rothahan, they turned off the road towards some hills which stood tall and green in the distance. Where do we go then? Asked Merritt. Haram would have asked the same question if he'd been closer to Orist. Where? Why, we go hunting goblins, of course. And surely even you do not think that goblins wander freely among the roads of the kingdom, inviting any and all to slay them? We go up into the hills where the goblins may be found. And so they went. A day later, they were deep in the hills, 4 of them traveling carefully along some invisible path, while Asteran went scouting ahead. The hills, which had been fair and green and inviting from a distance, proved rugged and uneven at closed quarters. The trail, such as it was, wound in and among and up and over the hills, and off the trail. Going was hindered by patches of low-growing thorn and jumbled rock. They traveled much more slowly now, not merely because the trail was poor, as Orit said. There was always danger of running unawares into trouble, be it goblins, ogres, or dread man-eating mice of the interior. Aaron was fairly sure the mice were a joke, but had long since learned to avoid allowing himself to be the butt of the Shondakranian's humor. I don't know if that's right. Give me a second. Oh, okay. See, once again, silence. Not good. They also kept a watch during the night, something they had taken more casually on the more traveled roads of the kingdom. Deep in the hills, however, there was always danger. Everyone took a turn at the watch. Even Haram and Merritt took their turns, clutching their sticks and shivering, starting at the least sound. Asteran had a habit of coming back from scouting unannounced, stepping out almost into the midst from them of them in front of, oh my goodness, stepping out almost into the midst of them from nowhere, or so it seemed. She came back thus in the middle one day, saying, "Goblins ahead, 8 of them, coming his way quickly, too." Probably a scouting party looking for the main band. Orist looked around them at the scattered brush and rocks on the grassy hillside. Could we ambush them? There's not much cover between here and there. We could go back to that little stream we passed this morning and take the risk they might see our tracks. None of these 8 tracker goblins, and a good thing too. The trackers have noses like bloodhounds. She paused. Still, you're right. The risk is too great. Orts turned to the mage. Sagahan, what of you? Could you make us invisible for a while? Haram expected the mage to think for a while before answering, but he spoke immediately. No, not a spell full of invisibility. True invisibility, you see, requires that one bend the eyesight around the object to be rendered invisible, and bend it from every angle. To spread such a spell over 5 of us, 6 if you include the horse, would be to spread my power very thin. And if the spell were spread too thin, it is likely that the little thing might break it, leaving us visible at just the wrong time. There are some who would say, Orts broke in, let be, mage. We have no need of we need no lecture on your art and its shortcomings, or on what some mage says about the possibilities or impossibilities of this, that, or the other. There is a spell, you see, not true invisibility, but a spell, of this, that, or the other. What we need is help. Is there nothing you can do for us? Yes, I think there is. There's a spell, you see, not true invisibility, but a spell which will trick the goblin eyes into seeing rocks, bushes, or hummocks of earth. We all must be very still and quiet, however. The spell would trick goblin eyes into missing movements involved in breathing, but something such as scratching or turning the head would break the spell for sure. Though even there, I am certain I understand that certain mages are able. Yes, but at the moment we care little about what certain mages are able to do. They are not here, and we have to make do with you. Let us get on with this. First, said Asteran, a few warnings and instructions. As I said, I believe these scouts are for a larger band. This means we must mark the place of the sun in the sky at the time when the ambush opens, for after that, by the time the sun moves one palm width, the main band will either be on us or so near that escaping them will be a very chancy thing. Forrest was nodding his head. Exactly. And you two lads, you'll leave the fighting to us. Goblins are trained from imphood to fight, and you are not. But it would be a help if you were to dance around, threatening them with your knives, to give time for the 3 of us to deal with them. You understand? Yes, sir, they said together. They moved the pony 100 paces back, far enough to keep him out of sight of the goblins. It is difficult, Sagahan had said, to keep an animal such as this still for a sufficient time to trick the goblins into thinking it was anything but an animal. Mind you, it is rumored that the mage Kendarit is supposedly able to keep an animal still by a spell, but... Or it's cut him off. Leave it be, mage. Let the spell work as you say. What as a Zawa or Nithar or the back of the moon is able to do. Oryx asked Gasteron. You don't think that any of them will see your tracks, either coming or going? I told you, none of them are trackers. And when the day comes that I leave traces for a common goblin to see, that day I will go to Shandakar and become a temple prostitute for Mona Hiron. The prospect of a fight apparently made Oryx almost merry. Quietly, little lady. I have no doubt of your abilities. Now let us pick our places. He took his bow out from his back. It was a recurved bow, which seemed to be about the thickness of one of Haram's wrists, and strung it with no effort at all. He looked around. Now this curvy lady is ready too. And all of you, we cannot let any of the goblins escape. The main band will be after us soon enough. But if one of this group escapes, he'll bring them that much sooner. So, to your places then. The Shondek looked around and assigned positions to each of the party. They sat down and Sagahan began to speak. Some sort of coolness trickled down over Haram, staring at the crown on his head. At the crown of his head. Wow, sorry. Hold on here. Dun, dun, dun. There was an itching along with it, but he dared not scratch, remembering the mage's warning. The feeling subsided a little, and he continued to wait and watch the hillside opposite. Haram sat as still as he could. He wished he could look around at his companions to see what they were doing, but Sagahan had cast his spell, and they had to sit still. All he could do was stare at his hand clenched around his stick, occasionally flicking his eyes over to where they expected the goblins. After what seemed like a wait of 3 hours, he was sure that the goblins had gone some other way, or worse still, that they had seen Asteran's tracks and were circling around to carry a surprise attack of their own. And the band dared not move their heads for fear of dispelling the magic that hid them. Was that a movement on the hill opposite? Haram concentrated on it. Yes, it was a goblin head. It was soon accompanied by another and another. Finally, all 8 of them were visible, marching toward the hidden band. The magic must indeed be working, for goblins showed no sign of alarm as they marched down the slope, and then up again toward the ambush. Haram had ample time to study the goblins on this, his first sight of a live specimen. They were not a large folk, the biggest being only a little taller than Haram himself, but they were all squat and heavy-muscled. Their arms were a little longer in proportion to their bodies than a man's, and their fingers, like the rest of their bodies, were thick and covered with dark hair. Their faces were all large and round, ugly enough to be easily distinguished from a man's. They were all armed and armored. 2 of them were wearing scale mail, overlapping metal scales sewn on leather jackets. Several of them wore heavy-boiled leather cuirasses and metal plates sewn in strategic places. And the others wore plain leather. All had helmets, mostly metal bowls with nasals and ear guards, though 2 only had thick leather caps. They had heavy recurved bows hung on their backs, and each had a round shield also slung at the back. Haram guessed that they must feel certain of their safety in this country walking without shields. Each had a belt at his waist, bearing a short, heavy sword at one side and a dagger on the other. Slung here and there on the belts were little knives, small hatchets, pouches, and other accoutrements. They came even closer. Haram saw that each of them had at least one ear pierced, and from that ear hung a cord of leather bearing several decorations. There were several feathers, dyed and painted in bands of bright colors. Each also had small bones tied individually to the cords, and some had what looked very much like human ears tied to the cords. Harum was suddenly afraid. He'd heard stories of goblin fights, and he had known that he would be fighting goblins at some time, but he was suddenly aware of the fact that he might be killed in doing so. The goblins were closer now, so close that he could see every hair on their faces, see the yellow eyes searching the hillside for traces of enemies. Would Orist never give the signal? Perhaps he was still frozen with fright like Harum himself? There was a shrill whistle, and before he knew what he was doing, Harum was on his feet. In the same movement, he saw a black arrow in the chest of one of the goblins, saw him fall. Another arrow, one of Astaran's shafts, fletched with leaf green feathers, struck a second goblin, and Sagahan was standing, pointing a finger. A bolt of light shot from that finger and struck a goblin, who fell like a stone. Harum saw another bolt from Sagahan's finger strike a goblin. The goblin saw the goblin fall, but begin to rise again. He had no more time to look then, for one of the other goblins was bounding toward him, sword heavily upraised. Dun dun dun! And that's where the chapter leaves off. So that was that. Yeah, this is a shorter one because there's only a couple pages. There's gonna be a few chapters that have very, very short chapters. So it is what it is. I'll probably do more in depth of what I'm feeling about the chapters as we go. Um, I kind of like that we get into the adventure right away. We get excitement right away. So that's fun. Um, I think the next chapter will be kind of the telling chapter. It'll kind of like really, really set everything. Um, yeah, and I'm excited to see what that's going to look like. So you can join me tomorrow with that. Thank you for tuning in, and I will talk to you again tomorrow. Have a good night.